Technicians of Spaceship Earth, welcome to Hawkbinge, your companion on adventures through space and time. Yes, we've journeyed through time from where we left you last in 1992. It is now April the 5th, 2024, which means there is a new album from Jane Weaver, which I'm excited to listen to. I haven't got to it yet, though, because there's also the small matter of a new album from Hawkwind, and that means that the Hawkbinge release day reaction crew has reassembled, and that's me, and it's also Matt. Hello, Matt. How you doing?
Hi, Andy. I'm doing very well. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And acclaimed Hawkwind author, soon to be acclaimed Peter Hamill author, Joe Banks. Welcome back, Joe.
Thank you. Thanks for having me yet again.
I've come to think of this period of Somnia, The Future Never Waits, and now Stories from Time and Space as the Hawkbinge era of Hawkwind albums, which is incredibly pompous of me.
The golden years.
Exactly so. I remember when we did Somnia, that day was a challenging, running around like a mad thing day trying to get listens in. My memory is that it was like that for everyone. But then when we did The Future Never Waits, we kind of had it together and we were in a better place and we got some good listens in. Where are we this time? I've managed to have a couple of listens to this and actually one pretty deep listen to it where I was able to really focus on it and write some notes. How about you, Joe? How have you gone on with this one?
Yeah, just a couple of listens. I just kind of stuck it on in the background first time when I was doing something else, actually. But then I did, like you, had a deep listen and I've made some notes. So yeah, I'm ready to go.
And Matt, please tell me you've heard it.
I've heard it several times through, once as loud as I could to get really into it, and then once with headphones on and a pen in hand. So I have thoughts.
Good man. 3 people with thoughts. What more could you ask for? One person you won't hear as much on this as we thought is William Orbit, who Matt and I saw in the show at the Royal Albert Hall, and that show was amazing, as we talked about. Not entirely sure what contribution William made, apart from the fact he did look like he was having a whale of a time. And he was touted to produce this album and then didn't really. And we were kind of wondering what had happened to William, and dug out an article in Prog magazine, which is now one of my favorite all-time Hawkwind stories. When the Hawkwind book comes out that includes this period of time, I want this story in there. So there's a couple of paragraphs here I'm going to read out. This is the interview with Dave in Prog magazine about William Orbit. He did one track, recalls Brock. We'd just send him basically a 2-track file and he overdubbed some stuff on it, and it was certainly great. Then he said, "Oh, can you send me the multi-tracks?" And we sent him the multi-tracks, and then we didn't hear from him. Brock continues, "I managed to get hold of him," and he says, "I'm really sorry about this, everybody. It's been my dream to work with Hawkwind, but unfortunately, I've got involved with this other project." So basically, William Orbit ghosted them, which is hysterical.
I love that line, "I managed to get hold of him."
Yeah, exactly.
I have this vision of Dave on the phone kind of going, "Oh my God, why can't I get hold of this guy? We've got an album to complete."
Yeah, it's not you, Dave. It's me. But it reminds me of a football story, which obviously the football and Hawkwind crossover is probably very small, but there's a very famous football manager called Carlo Ancelotti. And for some reason, he was manager of Everton for a while. And I remember an end of season press conference where he was being asked a lot of questions about whether he was going to stay. And he was like, "I'm Everton. This is the project. I'm staying. I'm definitely not leaving." And then I think the following day, he got a phone call from Real Madrid and he resigned. So I've got this idea in my head of William Orbit going, "Lads, I can't wait to produce this. It's been my dream to work with you. I'm so in. Hang on, that's my phone. Just let me get this. I'll be right back." And then 10 minutes later, the band going, "Has anybody seen William?" So he hasn't done this. The rumours are that he's doing something with them, so we'll see what happens to that. But I do kind of love that story. It just feels very, very Hawkwind. And now I think that William Orbit should be in Hawkwind just because of that. Okay, and with that done, the new album, Hawkwind, Stories from Time and Space. I remember Somnia needing a few listens, and I remember The Future Never Waits having things just instantly leapt out and grabbed you. What's happened to you on first couple of listens, Joe? Have you found this one with things leaping out at you, or do you think this is a grower?
I think this one, I mean, and I should qualify everything by saying, obviously, this is just first listen, but I wasn't grabbed by it immediately as I was with The Future Never Waits. It's got some strong material on it, but I don't think it's the same kind of album as The Future Never Waits.
My general attempt to grab hold of this album has been harder than the other two that we've had as they've been coming out. I was expecting maybe more stories given the name of the actual album itself, and I didn't feel I got that. And for me, a bit like what Joe said, there's no incinerator level track on this album for me. So I do feel like on my first listens, it doesn't feel as strong as the previous one, but I found some things to like in it.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's got a very different feel. I mean, Hawkwind albums, as you know, Matt, from the WTF messages you send me after your first listen to every Hawkwind album, this one is, again, defies what you think it's going to be. It was a bit like Joe. First time I put it on, I was distracted by having to do lots of other things, and it kind of passed me by a little bit. And then it was the next listen where I started to pick things up. And when I did the deep listen and started to write some notes, bits of it had started to emerge that were digging their hooks in. So I kind of can imagine that the deep dive that we eventually do on Somnia will be quite different to the hot take we did on Somnia. I think the deep dive we do on The Future Never Waits will probably be quite similar to the hot take that we did on Future Never Waits. I kind of think that the deep dive we do on this album might be quite different to the hot take that we do, because I can feel it moving a little bit with each time I go back to it. So those views I have today, I think, are probably going to shift a little bit in time, as they have done a little bit with Somnia. But an interesting one, because they always are interesting, because they always are so different. And it certainly starts with something which is very different, something which I certainly wasn't really prepared for, to be honest. When I put it on, this was not what I expected. Joe, Our Lives Can't Last Forever.
Yeah, as you say, it's a very interesting choice for an opener, both tonally and lyrically. When you think of The Future Never Waits, you straight into the title track, very big, expressive, expansive kind of instrumental, whereas this is not the grand sweeping entrance like that. But it is basically a kind of melancholic ballad. It's quite restrained, it's quite poignant. Dave is singing basically about mortality, and obviously as the Hawkwind voyage at some point will come to an end, or certainly kind of if the ship continues, it will have to leave Dave at some point. And it kind of feels like he's kind of talking about this. I mean, later on in the lyric, he's also talking about the end of man. So, you know, in terms of our lives can't last forever, he's not only talking on an individual level, he's also talking perhaps on a kind of species level as well, as that humanity, kind of all of our lives can't last forever. So it's a really bold opener, actually, to kind of go in with something like this, I think. There's a real swell of kind of heavenly keys that keeps on coming in behind that piano, and really reminded me of D-Rider for some reason from Hall of the Mountain Grill, which is another one of those Hawkwind tracks which is perhaps more emotional than most, and is also in its own way dealing with the nature of time and getting older. So yeah, it's not an expected opener at all. But it is good. And again, it's, as you said, Andy, it's showing that they're doing something a bit different and a bit not what you expect, which is obviously something I like. I think that's a good thing for them to be doing.
Absolutely. Matt, how did this grab you?
For an opener, it wasn't what I was expecting at all. It felt almost PXR5-ish to me, and they were singing about themselves. I wrote a bit like what Joe said. It feels like Hawkwind coming to terms with their own mortality and putting down on paper, and also just putting it out right away. You know, they didn't couch this like mid-album or anything. This is the first thing we're going to talk about, and everything definitely builds around this. It's not a Hawkwind lament in the same way that we've heard before. It feels more like Hawkwind sitting us down and teaching us the facts of life a little bit, and we have the track building around that and helping to punctuate that. I wrote down Whimsical Kalimba.
Good band name.
Because I feel like I don't think we've heard them use that instrument much, but it does feel, again, very kind of minor key. I like the line, as we fade into the future, as an interesting idea. As the future carries on, we will fade. It's not the idea that we become the past, even though we do. It's like we're fading into the future. It's another way of looking at it, which is an interesting way. You know, using the word fade always sounds a bit more insipid, like you have less impact on things. So almost the idea of coming to terms with having less impact on what's coming. And while it's sad, it still has a little bit of drama to it. I felt like it almost like they could be on stage. You know, I feel like this could almost be an actual musical number itself. You know, I could imagine like a hero of a production singing this somehow at the end of a big revelation that the characters had. So it has a little bit of theatricality to it, as well as, I think, being based on a kind of truth. It's a good way of setting up some of the instrumentation. I think there's a really nice keyboard bass line around the 3.5 minute mark, which sounds really good. I also like this idea of them adding distortion to the vocal at the end, whether or not that means that he's like physically breaking up or whether or not that's to more emphasize the final part of the track. I don't really know yet, but I like that as an extra layer to put on at the very end. And as Joe said, that swirling chorus has a really nice feeling of pulling us forward throughout the whole track, which I really liked. So yeah, I was surprised that this was the first track, but on subsequent listens, it's actually been one of the most interesting on the album, I think.
I'm quite fascinated with this one. The second time I heard the album when I wasn't distracted, I was immediately had a response to this because it's very emotional and it's very poignant. And those two things to me don't appear in Hawkwind very often. I remember feeling like that when I hear High Rise, for example. And that was the feeling that I got. And it reminded me that there's a track on the final Queen album called The Show Must Go On. And that is a powerful, emotional song. And this felt like Hawkwind's The Show Must Go On. And it starts being quite sparse. Obviously, it builds. But in those opening bits where it's quite sparse, Dave's voice is quite fragile. And Dave, usually as a singer, Dave is very strong. And I remember, Matt, when we saw Arthur Brown in Vegas at Psycho Festival, and I said, he's got a good voice, isn't he? And you went, yeah, he's got a really kind of strong old man voice. And I hadn't thought of it that way. And then I thought, hey, absolutely right. I get what you're saying. Dave's voice, on the other hand, is just a strong voice. So the fragility in his voice here is something I haven't really heard from Dave. And that reminded me of those final Johnny Cash recordings. You know, and he re-records Hurt by Nine Inch Nails. And it's very fragile and the emotion comes through the fragility, basically. And he kind of owns it in that way. And I was fascinated by that because it isn't something I've heard before. Musically, I really like the guitar solo, and I was trying to work out if that was Dave or Magnus, and it sounds very Dave to me, that guitar solo. So I really like that. So yeah, this was the track that tells you forget everything you thought you were going to get from this record because it's going to be very different. And that surprise definitely continues, Matt, with the second track, The Starship, One Love, One Life. Let's get together. It'll be all right.
Yeah, it's adding to my oddly jaunty collection of Hawkwind tracks. I think I now have two. This strange spacey bossa nova kind of thing, which is very different to the first track. It's almost like Hawkwind's, well, we might die at some point, but look, I can still be groovy, so this is fine. It's almost like a 1-2 following on from that thought in an interesting way. For me, it's not what I wanted in a second track. You know how Hawkwind can normally do quite a good setup and knockdown. We've just done Electric TP. That had a great setup and knockdown. I don't hate this track, actually. And for me, it takes a while to get going. When it gets down to around the 4-minute mark, I really start to feel like it's built up steam. We have a groove. There's fun guitar. There's keyboard noodling. There's this one love, one life chant through it. And I actually get into it. But it takes a very long time for me to warm up to this track. I see where they're going with it, the whole track. But for me, it's missing some drive or speed or something to get that joyous vibe before the 4-minute mark. So it's a bit of a slog. So, yeah, I feel like this would have been more fun towards maybe the end of the album. For a second track, it's quite long and meandering, and I appreciate some focus that they normally bring on a second track. Maybe as a relief from the first track, it kind of works, but at least on my first couple of listens, I don't mind this track, but it's not where I want it to be.
Yeah, Joe, I was wondering whether this track is positioned as track number 2 simply because they're very conscious of how emotional and poignant the first one is.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's why it's there, is to create an instant pick-me-up, because it starts quite mellow, but a bit more upbeat. And then, as Matt says, this amazing kind of shuffling rhythm and bass line comes in, like a circular bass line, which for some reason I've got down in my notes here. It reminds me of the theme of Thunderbirds, or something to do with Thunderbirds anyway. I have to say, I absolutely love it. This is probably my favorite track on the album. It's really, really good because, again, that shuffle beat is not something you'd expect. It really kind of draws you in, I think. And again, Dave's vocal is very interesting on this. It's kind of more laid back again. In fact, I think most of his vocals on this album, there's no point where he's really going for it. He's in a much more kind of mellow vocal mood overall. But as far as I can tell, the vocals are about getting on the Starship. But the way it's presented is a bit like those old adverts for air flight in the 1940s and 50s as this, optimistic utopian thing. And he's kind of saying some of the lyrics, enter the Stardome, get your ticket on the right. Take your seat, just relax. And, this idea of you're going to be voyaging off to Galaxy 17, I think he says at one point. And that, though, is a metaphor, I think, just very generally for kind of enjoying the ride of life, which is where the subtitle comes in, I guess. I think it's a great groove. And then after the vocals, you get this great spacey guitar and synth. And the synth I absolutely loved. That was really taking me back to the glory days of Simon House. It's got that same kind of sound to it. House is a brilliant keyboard player, but he was never noodly. His keys are always very directional. And I think Tim Lewis's keys, similarly, he doesn't go wild at any point, but he's very painfully with it, and it really works well. There's some nice backing vocals in there. The guitars get a bit chunkier towards the end. I love it. Yeah, I thought this was a great track. There's a real sense of being in your first class seat and your classic amazing story of Starship looking out of the porthole as the cosmos kind of whizzes past you. So yeah, thumbs up from me.
Beautifully put. It definitely does have a sense of motion to it, for sure. I noted down the opening couple of bars reminded me of the openings to any number of 80s Rush tracks. But then it does something that happens quite a lot on The Future Never Waits, where I remember saying on Future Never Waits that the intro would be one thing, and then it would morph into a track that was entirely different. And that's what kind of happens here. And I remember I actually laughed when the bass line started, not at it, but simply because it was such a left field thing from where I was thinking it was going to go. And they really lean into it. Which I really like as well. They commit to it, and that's part of the joy of it. The oohs are back, that I remember, again, from the last album, remarking on that. And that keyboard solo at the end is really nice. The guitar solo and keyboard solo at the end. And they give it room to breathe, which I like, because there's another track on here where they don't. The keyboard sound actually reminded me of some mid-70s Tony Banks. And I actually wrote Levitation-esque, but I think you're right, because it's less busy than Tim Blake. But Levitation is the last time I can remember people being given the chance to do a real keyboard workout. So it kind of took me back there. But yeah, I think it is more Simon House than Tim Blake, but it's got that, have at it kind of thing. So yes, this gets a thumbs up for me. It's not my strongest one on the album, but I do like it. I like the pickup in pace. I think it's a good decision to do it. And again, you're really now into something which is going to be very different from what we've had before. And it leads us to the track which may well be my favourite track on the album, which is What Are We Going to Do While We're Here? And I've got more into this each time I've heard it. Strangely, simply on title alone, I instantly thought of Billie Eilish and When We Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? I couldn't get that out of my head, which is a strange juxtaposition. But it's got a nice intro to it. I like the opening bars. Again, I wasn't quite prepared for the saxophone to come in. The intro didn't take me where I thought it was going to take me, and the saxophone comes in. And the saxophone and fuzz guitar combo sounds very retro Hawkwind, very early 70s Hawkwind mix of saxophone and fuzzed guitars. And the saxophone also was quite Floydy, the kind of thing that Dick Parry would play with them. And that as a combo was nice. And then it becomes the rocker. And interestingly, when that beat comes in, it just felt so Sonic Attack era to me. I was waiting for Harvey Bainbridge to shout, "Silence!" at the beginning of that. And it had that energy. And again, they lean into it. And I really like that. And I love the lyrics. Our mechanics are wasted. They don't make much sense. There's no sense of urgency. It's making life tense. That's every project manager I've ever worked with having a meltdown right there. So I love this, and I haven't had the time to, which I did do with Future Never Waits. On Future Never Waits, I kind of went back and replayed individual tracks over and over, and I really like them. This one, I've just played the album all the way through. But when I do get the time to do it, then yeah, this is a track that I'm likely to revisit. So this one, a big thumbs up from me. How about you, Joe?
Another really good track, and it does exactly that thing that you said, where it starts with an intro, the big ambient wash of keys. You've got this very Hawkwind kind of little trilling arpeggio going on in there. Nice, some spare jazzy bass as well. And then it goes to the saxophone part, which again, I wasn't expecting, but was very welcome. And then you go into the driving space rock section. So as you say, it sets up an intro and then it goes somewhere different from where you were expecting. The title is great. It kind of really sets the track up because it makes you think, okay, so what's this about? What are we going to do while we're here? I think I read somewhere, and this might be entirely incorrect, but it's about going to Mars.
Oh, really?
Getting there and going, okay, so what are we going to do while we're here? That might be complete nonsense, but I think more it was about what are we going to do while we're here? Again, going back almost to the idea of the opening track and time and mortality. It's like, what are we actually doing with our time? And like you said, that sense of urgency is lacking. And that could be to do with, all kinds of things in terms of, what we need to do to repair our planet. But yeah, overall, I really liked it. Another good track.
Cool. Matt?
I feel like you just put me in a really difficult situation because I was not impressed with this track, I'm afraid. I wonder if it's got a problem of being back-to-back 7-minute long tracks, which I know in the previous album, certainly we had quite a few of those. And I guess as we've just come to Electric TP in the canon episodes, certainly we're getting longer. But considering that I liked track 2 but didn't want it where track 2 is, and then I have this, I definitely don't want this where track 3 is. It feels like this sort of nesting drawer where we stand with this ambient intro, which I wrote like ambi-ish or something as a new genre, because it's not quite ambient, because it's got these nice little loops in it whilst there's some very human playing. And then we slam into this surprise sax moment, which didn't make me feel particularly happy with it. And then we switch again at 3:30 into like overdrive speed. So now we mess with the tempo of the whole thing. And I feel like the drums aren't hitting anywhere near as hard as they need to in order to really make that switch feel good. In fact, I feel like a lot of the drums, unfortunately, in this are quite insipid. The cymbals and the the little twinkling elements that we get are really nice, but I'm lacking any kind of kick. And it doesn't have to be shattering or anything, but it just doesn't feel like there's much in the bottom end there. The bass is doing a lot of work, but there's not much in the actual drum, which is a shame considering how good they were live at that, and I felt that that might help this out. It does feel like it's trying to get somewhere, but for me, it's kind of running in place. It's not bringing me along with it. And then we kind of collapse back into the smooth jazz at the end. And so, yeah, overall, this feels like someone swept up 3 ideas for tracks, glued them together and went, that'll do. I do like the line, our mechanics are wasted and don't make much sense. I think that's fun. And I think there might be an idea in here. And maybe with some more listens, I'll get there. But for the 2.5 listens that I had, every time I listened to this, I was like, ugh, and just wanted to move on.
Okay, well, we did move on, and we moved on to the tracker. So, Matt, we're going to find out now whether the tracker is any kind of redemption.
It's certainly better. I don't think it gets above okay. It sounds kind of familiar, but I can't put my finger on why. I think maybe it's just the way that the vocals hit with the rhythm, maybe. I think they've done that before. It feels like it's operating in a slightly familiar Hawkwind template, but I couldn't tell you exactly where I've heard it before. It's a basic rocky number. There's a nice little spacey breakdown about 1.5 minutes in, which I quite like, but the actual rocky part of it, I guess a bit like what happened with the last album, a lot of the rocky things I wasn't super into for whatever reason. This feels a bit like that to me, so I think it's perfectly fine. The very end of the track is weird as hell for me. Like there's this washout at 4 minutes, which takes us into this strange little coda where someone rather uninterestedly tells us that they contacted an alien race so they can go to bed. And I just feel like if I found an alien race, I would probably be a bit more energized by that discovery. But the way that they talk about it, like they just finished the dishes, feels a very strange way of coming to that revelation. And again, maybe if I listen to it again, there's a point to that, which I'm missing. But for a track that I'm listening to right now, for it to be at the level of okay and end like that, it's just a bit ridiculous to me right now. So I think back to back, these are a bit meh for me personally, but I think that might just be my current Hawkwind Rocky biases when they put a tape like I had last time.
I've got fewer notes for this than for a lot of the other tracks, actually. I've got that it's solid as a rocker and has a more recent sound to it, and again reminded me of Sonic Attack era in terms of its sound. Quite like the strong vocal, and I've put quirky ending ? Because the ending, as you say, is quite fantastically random. I don't think it'll ever stand out for me as a track in that sense. It does its thing, and I'm not sure on listens I've really zoned into it fully. It hasn't done that for me. But, as you say, it's okay. Joe, do you have any more stronger feelings on it?
No, I think that's probably fair. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward rocker. I like what it's about, though, hoping to make contact with another race. I think one of those is please save us from our doom. So I think the idea is going right back to something like Bowie's Starman, where, you're waiting for the starman in the sky to come down and save you. And it seems to be along that idea. And I think that's where you get this kind of little joke at the end. And it's a very Dave Brock piece of humor, I think, where he's like, we found them, the job's done. Time for me to go to bed now, knowing all is well. And then, well, I hope so, comes in at the end. And it's a bit like, there's no guarantee that if you contact aliens, as many people have said, that they would be coming down to save us from ourselves. They'd think, oh, nice planet, let's have it, as they say on Mars Attacks.
lunch.
Yeah, that may be where you get that jokey bit at the end. But other than the lyrics, it's okay, but nothing particularly special. The only other note I've got down here is that the last three songs, for some reason, they feel vaguely conceptual. I haven't actually seen the lyrics written down, but they, for some reason, seem connected with each other. There's a line again where he says, "I drive my car up to the dome," which I thought was possibly like some kind of observatory, but he's mentioned like a star dome in the previous song as well. So I don't know. But yeah, it's fine. It's okay, but it's not a standout track.
Exactly. It's not a bad transition into the instrumental, The Eternal Light. How did you find that, Joe?
Well, it's quite short, and I have 3 words. Heavenly voices. Nice.
That's an excellent review.
It doesn't really do much, then.
No.
It's perfectly nice, but it's just a connection track. Magnus has got on the keyboard and knocked out a few chords, and it's very nice, but it's just a connector track, really.
I've got one more word than you. I've got nice, doesn't do much. But we've both included the word nice in our reviews of The Eternal Light.
It is nice. Yeah, it is nice.
So let's see if Matt includes the word nice in his review of The Eternal Light.
Well, I've beaten your word count. A little ambient doohickey with some nice keyboard voices.
Yep, we've all agreed.
3 nices.
3 nices.
I think that one's nailed.
And the next one's interesting because Till I Found You, now I haven't played these back to back yet, but this feels to me that it picks up where Outside of Time left off on The Future Never Waits. Till I Found You is a lyric in Outside of Time, and Outside of Time is a lyric in Till I Found You. And my memory of it is that Outside of Time begins in a different way and has some instrumental thing and then resolves into this kind of Magnus song. And this starts with the Magnus song. So I haven't played them back to back to see if they literally could go together, but they're definitely 2 of a piece. And it's a very simple chord sequence all the way through into the kind of change in tempo that sounds a bit more driven at the end. And I think it gets better as it goes along. And again, this is one where I put the levitation-ish keyboard outro that fades out way too soon. I want this keyboard freak out to go on for a lot longer. And Matt, you're nodding to that bit. So I'm guessing we're agreeing on at least part of this.
Yeah, well, I mean, Hawkbinge fading out has always been a little personal bugbear, and this one fading out is a real shame. I feel a little shortchanged by this, probably even more so by the fact that right now this is probably my favourite track. It's certainly the one that's called the most to me in my few listens. I quite like this one. I like that it's got this very interesting skip in the groove, which keeps you on your toes. There's this slight little push and pull around like the 4th bar, which always draws me in, which I don't feel the other tracks have. So I think that's really cool. We got some samples for the first time. And while I don't think the singing is amazing, the Outside of Time chant at the end of every bar works for me. It holds interest through the entire 5 minutes that it's playing, which not everything else has done at this point. So this feels like a nicely contained 5-minute track. It's got a cool synth solo at the midpoint. I like the cymbals all the way through it. They're very detailed and help plink the whole thing along. This sudden lurch to a higher tempo, I don't feel it needs, but also it doesn't ruin it. So if they want to do that, then they can. I'll go along with it. Yeah, I really like it, apart from the fade out, which is a real shame and does make me feel like I've been shortchanged, considering that some of the tracks I don't like have been 7 minutes. It's annoying that this one's 5 with a fade. You know, I feel like they could have swapped the length round maybe, but no, for what it is, I think it's a nice one.
Joe, did you recognize this from The Future Never Waits?
I didn't at all. That was a very good spot. Now that you described it, that does sound entirely plausible. It's quite a nice riff on this, actually. It's quite choppy. And like Matt says, there's something going on with the rhythm, which is a little spikier than what we've heard before. I think I would have liked to have somehow heard this, though, a little cleaner. It's swathed in keys from the very start. And I guess one of the things that you don't really hear on kind of Hawkwind albums anymore is where you're just hearing kind of like Dave's guitar on its own, kind of really pumping out one of those classic riffs. And I think this would have been an opportunity here to do that kind of thing. But as it is, it's kind of all swathed in keys a bit, which takes slightly away from its impact. Magnus's voice is not really a rock voice, but there's a kind of underlying vulnerability to it, which I think works quite well on this track. And yeah, more great keys from Tim. That was good. And it kicks up a gear, get a rock solo and some nice piano. But I think the overall dynamic on this track, the mixing of elements doesn't quite work for me. I think it's a track with a lot of potential, but it doesn't feel completely worked out for me.
I'm very much hoping that when I do go back and play Outside of Time from Future Never Waits, it's not entirely different to how I remembered it. We shall see. Hopefully there will be an extra at some point that they must have of this with another 2 minutes added on where Tim Lewis is just going completely crazy, because that sounds like that's just brewing up.
One can only hope.
We next get an instrumental. I love this, Joe. How do you come to it?
Underwater City. Yeah, no, it's really nice. There's more ambient keys, but the main thing here is some kind of nice contemplative acoustic picking from Magnus. I assume it's Magnus, so it's a Magnus track.
Yeah.
And it's relatively short. It's 3 minutes, but it's nice. It holds the attention. Reminded me a little bit of an Anthony Phillips thing, his kind of solo stuff after he'd just left Genesis. He did some stuff which was quite similar to this. But then, actually, as it picks up, some stronger keys come in towards the end. And I don't know if it's just the way they're working against the pick notes, but it suddenly gave me real Hall of the Mountain Grill vibes, the actual title track, Hall of the Mountain Grill, which is another Simon House thing. And that's like a classical track. It's absolutely beautiful. I love that track. But for some reason, the way that the keys and the notes are working on this, it started to sound like a ghost of that track, which I really, really liked. So this was a good one.
I have written in my notes, this sounds like a touch of Hall of the Mountain Grill. So we're definitely picking up the same vibes there.
High five.
Yeah, high five, definitely. I really like this because the notes he's picking, they have a very unsettling vibe to them. And rather than being underwater, I was thinking, if you imagine the cover of the first Black Sabbath album with the mill in the distance, that's what came into my mind. It's like it's some kind of a setting, but it's not quite what it should be. And the notes he's picking have that kind of vibe to me, and I love that kind of vibe. And the synth, when it comes in, just accentuates that. This could have been twice as long as it is, and I'd have been very, very happy. How about you, Matt?
I didn't name check Hall of the Mountain Grill by name, but I did write in my notes that it reminded me of some of the more classic original albums when I talked before about how I really like the recording of how they get those guitars, and it really sounds like they're being played. And as someone who doesn't listen to a huge amount of guitar music, it's nice to hear that and really feel like I'm in the room. I think there's a lot of detail in it. You know, you feel every strum and pick, which is great. And again, it's that OG Hawkwind thing where the guitar is doing a lot of the work, but actually the space that's around the track is built up by these rather quite glistening keys, which help just to fill it out and just add this extra bed to it, which helps your mind wander around the track as it plays, which I think is really nice. Even when we get to a point where we change key by the sound of it and the strings come up, you know, there's this build of more orchestral feeling. I think it's still definitely a keyboard voice, but it sounds more orchestral and stringy over the keys that we had before. So there's definitely an A-B to this, which I think helps carry it through to the end of its runtime. I think for me, I don't want it to be much longer than it is. I think it's really nice as it is. I like the fact it's a nice, succinct little reference back to things they've done before really well. So yeah, I really like this one as a back-to-back between Till I Found You and Underwater City. It's a really nice sort of midway point for the album for me.
Exactly. It is pretty much the midway point. So reaching that point at an instrumental and goes into another mysterious instrumental, Matt, in the night sky.
Yeah, very spooky chorus intro. For me, this sounded a bit like Hulse the Planets somehow. Probably need to listen to it a bit more in order to figure out where I've got that, but just an immediate reaction to me. But yeah, it's a nice bit of ambient again. Maybe weird to have it back to back with Underwater City. Maybe it's a lot of ambient altogether. I don't have too many notes other than I thought it was cool. And yeah, somehow it felt reminiscent of that kind of contemporary classic feeling of as you get from something like The Planets, that kind of brooding spaciousness that you get at the start of that thing before it really starts to build up. You know, I think that's probably where I'm feeling that. But I think I definitely need to listen to this a few more times in order to get a real opinion of it. But my current opinion is positive.
Nice. How about you, Joe? How do you get on with The Night Sky?
Yeah, I mean, it's another relatively short track. I agree with Matt. It's a little curious to have both of them back to back with Underwater City. But this is a different kind of ambient, if you like. There's a big wash of string synths. And there's kind of recurring motif of kind of distant marching drums. The other note I have is that it's got that vibe of a aftermath of a battle type thing. So it's a nice piece. But as I said, slightly curious that it's back to back with Underwater City, I think.
Totally agree. It's funny, now we've been talking through this, I would have thought that given that this and Underwater City kind of serve the same purpose, and there's another one later on, kind of similar length, serve the same purpose in terms of the sounds, you could have put The Night Sky somewhere in the first four, because you've got vocal tracks in a lot there. You could have broken that up with something like this, and it would have worked quite well. I do like the mood, and I like the choral elements, and I like the droplets sounding thing at the end. I don't exactly know what it is, but it added some atmosphere. So yes, I agree. We agree all around actually that it's quite a nice piece, but they perhaps could have had more impact if used elsewhere. And then, Joe, we get Heroes. I mean, Traveller of Time and Space.
Oh, you've stolen the first line of my notes. Yeah, that was exactly the best thing I was going to say. That the track comes straight in, very much in that kind of rising guitar sound that we have come to associate with Heroes and Robert Fripp's guitar sound. And it's not quite the same power as Robert Fripp, but it instantly puts you in mind of the same thing. But I think actually the defining feature, certainly of the first half of the song, is the drums. So I agree what Matt said earlier, that there are quite a few times on this album where I think I'd like those drums to somehow punch forward a bit more. It's like everything is in the mid-range. There's no definitive snare sound, for instance. But here we get kind of like battle drums or something. They've got that kind of really woody feeling to them, like a tribal vibe. And that's really effective. An interesting lyric here from Dave. It starts off kind of almost Spirit of the Age vibe, because he's basically a kind of a space traveler, as it says, yes, traveler in time and space, indeed. And he's saying, remembering once I had a wife. And it's this idea that he's gone off probably to do his work in the stars. And when he comes back, his wife will be dead, you know, as in Spirit of the Age. But it's interesting that talking about how he's carrying a cargo of humans' waste. And I have this vision of him as a space trucker doing some intergalactic waste management, getting rid of whatever crap we've built up on Earth, or who knows. I'll tell you what it could be actually now, instantly thinking about it, of course. It's all of the dead bodies from the beginning. So these are all of the bodies that have been given up. And it's like, how do we dispose of them? I know, I'm going to chuck them into the heart of the sun or something. So that may be the human's waste he's talking about. That would be a nice conceptual connection there. And then we get the mellow breakdown, some nice wandering acoustic, but then it becomes a bit darker towards the end. There's a nice sinister kind of electronic pulse and what sounds like sampled strings, sampled violins. So that's good. I like that darker second half again. Again, I'm not quite sure if this kind of mashup arrangement completely works. I'm kind of sometimes missing essential dynamic in some of these songs. It feels like sometimes they could be a bit more dynamic in the way that they're put together. But the individual parts here, I think, are good and interesting.
I agree. I do like that middle section, the meat in the hero sandwich. I like this with the strings pulsing. Funny enough, I've written down drum sound. And when I read it, I thought, did I write that down because I liked it or because I didn't like it? I've just written drum sound. But I think it was a positive thing because I agree it's something we'll probably get into when we sum up. There are opportunities for the drums to really come through across the album when they don't. So I also liked when the vocals double track. I think it's Dave behind Magnus. I can't quite remember now, but I liked the effect of that. Matt, what did you think of Traveller of Time and Space?
For me, this has the Starship vibes a bit in terms of it's pretty basic for me for the first 4 minutes, and then it picks itself up and gets much more dramatic with this sinister violin sample that we have, a more intense bass line, which for me creates some interest. So a bit like that second track, I listened to it going, okay, I guess this is fine. And then suddenly 4 minutes later, I'm like, wow, this has actually gone somewhere really interesting. And then it's kind of done. So I don't mind it for what it is. It's kind of a basic rocker with a decent ending to me. But again, maybe I haven't listened to it as much as I need to, because I feel like you're finding stuff in it which I haven't grasped yet.
That's fair. Let's face it. It's a reaction pod at the end of the day. We next get something that to me could easily have been on Future Never Waits in terms of the sound and the positioning of the piano, which is Regenerate. I'm not entirely sold on the piano riff of this, I have to say. It hasn't caught me yet. But it does sound to me very, very like at ease. This is Hawkwind being very relaxed. But the beginning, I have another obscure reference for you. The beginning reminded me of FX on the Black Sabbath Volume Volume 4 album. So what happened there, and this is, believe me, this is better than that, because what happened there was Tony Iommi naked in the studio on an awful lot of drugs, just wearing his big metal cross, and his cross is just banging against the strings, and they thought that was great, so they recorded it with a lot of echo. But in this, at the very beginning, it feels to me like just a bit of noodling going on that doesn't feel like it's achieving anything particularly until just a few seconds at the beginning, and then the piano riff comes in that I don't hate, but I'm not completely taken with it. I'm guessing I'm the only one who thought of FX at that point, and I might be the only one in the world who thinks of FX at that point. Joe, Regenerate.
I know what you mean, actually. At the very start, you've got this kind of couple of minutes of quite dark ambient stuff. What, again, sounds like distant sounds of either war or possibly construction, something being made. And then at the 2-minute mark, you get this, probably not a Rhodes piano, but it sounds like a Rhodes piano, electric piano riff, which I actually quite like. And I've got here very Floydy. And as it continues, and so you've got the riff, and then Tim does some more vamping over the top. It's very, very Rick Wright, circa Dark Side of the Moon, I guess. And it's got a good head nodding, vaguely funky feel. It's a bit of a jam. And as you say, it's nice they're just kicking back. But it's a good B-side track. It's not an A-side track, but still liked it.
Cool. Matt?
I think this actually has one of the most absorbing ambiences of the album. I started writing down what it could be. It could be abandoned alien spaceship ambience. It could be landing on a malevolent planet ambience. For me, it has a kind of BBC drama radio play feel to it, which I think is quite evocative. I quite like it. And I also like what it resolves into with this simple, but I think very well played piano chord line with guitar wails on top. It is maybe not super unexpected, but I've also written down confident and human. So I do think it has that nice feeling of being played, which is nice because, you know, ambient can sometimes feel a little overproduced sometimes, like it was all done in the box. But this, for me, I think what Joe said about even the choice of piano sound, it feels played, it feels a bit jammed. So I feel like they're all coming together on this track, which I like. I think this could have been track 2 to swap out from the Starship, because while this would still be a bit sinister after track 1, it resolves into something quite nice in its own right and kind of breaks its own tension. So yeah, I think maybe those tracks could have swapped and it would have worked quite nicely, because this resolves it faster and for me more pleasantly than 4 minutes of and then, oh no, that's good. So yeah, I think this is a nice track right now from what I remember. I enjoy it. I think the ambience is good and has that pulling you into it, which Hawkwind have definitely done many times before when we've been talking about their older albums. So nice to hear it again on the freshest one.
Nice. And we have another now in the Black Sea, another one of these. In fact, I've written another uneasy interlude. And it's another one like when we were talking about the Night Sky, you just drop them in between tracks. It's a bit of a breather. I like the mood of this, but I didn't have an awful lot else really to bring to the table on the Black Sea. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I wrote Foghorn of Doom, ? As of this big sound that's going through it.
Another good band name.
It's quite a foreboding brass section through the whole thing, so I wonder whether or not they found that they could make their keyboard make this sound and be like, well, that's going on the album, because that's got a nice wah feeling to it, which is always fun. I think it's kind of neat. Starts to feel like a little blippy thing. It reminded me a little bit of the ending of Solaris somehow with its ambience, that feeling of like when he realizes he's still on the house with the lake and we slowly pull up. I feel like it's got that feeling to it somehow. So for a blip, I think it's a good blip. A good blip. Joe?
But it's funny you should mention that because, I mean, really the only note I got here is it's very science fiction soundtracky. I mean, Blade Runner is the obvious thing, but it's actually not like Vangelis. It's a bit more sinister than that. And as you say, they've probably come across this nice horn sound on the keyboard and said, yeah, that'll do. So it's a very short track again, but nice, yeah.
So we come to Frozen in Time, the second to last track. I'm interested to hear what you guys are going to say about Frozen in Time, because when I first heard it, I thought, I don't know which way people are going to go with Frozen in Time. So I'm keen to find out, Joe.
I think it was actually one of the tracks where I had to listen to it the whole way through before writing anything down. So it started off with classic Hawkwind wind sounds, and then it's a Magnus track, and he starts to sing, and it's almost a cappella at the start. And he's talking about, we've come to the end of the line, we're all just doing time. And it has this slightly apocalyptic feel to it. And then the verse kicks in. It's got this kind of acoustic with a fast pulse. It suddenly becomes a lot more urgent. And then it goes to what is trying to be, I think, a big chorus. And again, getting back to that thing about the dynamics of the arrangement or the production, it doesn't quite pick up in the way it should. There's not quite enough oomph. And I think that is actually, in this instance, to do with Magnus's voice as well. His voice isn't strong enough to pull it up. It doesn't perhaps have quite as much energy and oomph as it needs to. But it is a nice chord sequence. And it does have this interesting line at the end, again, kind of going back to the apocalyptic theme of abandoned by God, a forgotten game of chess. And I don't know whether that's a comment on the state that humanity has got itself into, or if it's a more personal reference, but that's certainly an interesting line. So overall, it's another song that you wouldn't necessarily expect from Hawkwind, I don't think. And I don't think it completely works, but interesting all the same.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? It took me by surprise again, and I ought to know enough to not be taken by surprise, but there you are. I actually was a little bit wary of it because I didn't like the opening bit with the way the vocals are in that opening bit. There's like a rhythm in the background, and Magnus's vocals don't seem to be aligned with it. And I found that slightly grating. It might be deliberate. I found it slightly grating, and then the rhythm comes in and it starts to pick up. The chorus is really catchy. There are occasions when Magnus can actually write something which is a little bit of an earworm and a bit catchy, and I like the chorus. And they go round twice first time round, and they go round 4 times second time round. And I really like that bit, and it's grown on me. The keyboards sound Floydy to me. So for me, it gets off to a very shaky start and then builds, and I like the chorus. But you're totally right in terms of the arrangement of it. And I remember going back to Somnia. There's a comment you had on Somnia that you were looking forward to Magnus's vocals becoming more confident, because the chorus comes in and it should be quite a big chorus where there's a little bit of a rush when the chorus comes in, because it's nice. And it is good, and I do enjoy it, and I do like it. But it could, with a little bit of extra TLC, I suppose, have been brought out even more and made bigger. Matt, Frozen in Time.
This is probably the best sung track on the album for me. As you just said about the confidence, I think that's definitely there. I think the rhyming is a little disappointing on this track. In fact, I think the rhyming is a little disappointing across all the tracks, to be honest. There isn't really a track where I feel like the real art of songwriting remains strong here. Like I said, I don't feel like we have an incineration chamber level idea, unfortunately, but it's sung nicely, so that's cool. This almost doesn't feel super Hawkwind to me. It actually feels like Opeth-y or something. You know, if you told me this was Hawkwind, I would be surprised. For me, it's lacking the key ingredients that I would identify a Hawkwind track for. You know, if you played me 3 tracks and said, find the Hawkwind one, and this was it, I probably wouldn't have found it. Again, further listening may change my mind on that, but the way it's sung, the way it's arranged, and the voices that we have through it, it feels much more that kind of proto minor key, strummy kind of Opeth-y thing compared to what I would expect from them. But I don't not like it. And like I said, probably the best sung track on the album at present listening for me.
It's interesting, isn't it? Doing a reaction pod, when you first hear it and something just leaps into your head and you're not in control of what that thing is, but that's kind of what this is about. So it's interesting that Opeth came to you, and for me earlier it was Sabbath in a weird way. I find these things interesting. But having said Opeth, I can see where you're coming from. It wouldn't have occurred to me, but now you've said it, I can go, oh yeah, I get that. So we come to the final track on the album, which is another instrumental, Stargazers. I love the intro to this. It's really bleak, and I like bleak wave. Basically, I'm into it. And there's quite a lot of the sound design in there, which is nice. And then there's an instant where I think it's going to go reggae, and then it doesn't, which now amuses me because I know it's coming each time. But I'm thinking, oh, it's going to go there. And then, no, it isn't. But I like the electric piano. I like electric piano anyway. And it's jazzy and the nice little bits of guitar, and it feels very relaxed again. And it has those big jazzy instrumentals on The Future Never Waits. This feels like it's part of that cycle. And as an end to the album, it rather works for me as the mood to take you out of the entirety of it. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I like the groove of this. And actually, I think the drums do some good work on this one. This is like the penance of the drums coming in and saying like, no, I may not be massively hard hitting and thrashy, but I can certainly be very animated and fun. And like I said, we'll pick a groove through it. Not in the same way as we had in, say, the What Are We Going to Do When We're Here, which I think was trying to be a bit groovy and jazzy, and for me kind of failed in a slightly frustrating way. For me, that kind of fell into almost Hawkwind trying to do a lo-fi beats to study to kind of sample. You know, I feel like if I grabbed a few bars of that and added a much more trip-hop drum pattern to it, I could re-upload it to YouTube and get a few listens from people who like Vaporwave. But this one feels much more authentic. I think everyone does a good job on this. I think the bass is strong. I think the jam is very pleasant through the whole thing. I think it's a good closer, a little bit like the second track, though. While it does fade into this, for me, sounding like a intergalactic furnace going out or some kind of interesting special effects sound to finish with, it does feel still a little bit of a handbrake, like we're jamming, and furnace, and we're out. Where I feel like I would much rather it dwelt on itself a little bit longer. I think this could have breathed for a little bit longer before we finished. But as an ending, I think it's a nice one. These last sort of 4 for me are not a bad little collection to end the album on.
Nice. Yeah, you're actually, there's a 4-piece. I wonder, the vinyl hasn't appeared. Usually the vinyl appears a couple of days after release. Be interested to see whether, I mean, I could just look this up, but I haven't. But it'd be interesting to see if those 4 tracks are the final 4 tracks on the last side of the album, because that would be quite a nice run through. Joe, Stargazers takes us to the end of this album.
Yeah, in terms of the final sides, I'm just looking because we have that image of the back cover of the album.
Of course we do.
And actually, side D, according to this, is just Frozen in Time and Stargazers, which by my reckoning is less than 10 minutes of music.
Okay.
And then side C is Traveler, Time and Space, Regenerate, and Black Sea. I'm not quite sure how those timings work, but at the moment, unless Stargazers is massively extended on the vinyl, yeah, that only makes the last side 10 minutes. Anyway, so Stargazers starts off with what I've got written down here as the bonfire of the synths. It's this kind of conflagration of electronics at the start. But then, yeah, it goes into another nice mellow groove, that pseudo road sound again. This is the one track on the album that is credited to the entire band. So actually, I think what it probably is, it's actually a jam. It feels quite jammy in a good way, but it feels like a jam which they've basically topped and tailed. Nice to hear. Dave's guitar is good throughout this album, actually. I really like how he's progressed as a guitar player. He sounds incredibly patronizing of me, especially as he's now 82. But he's definitely progressed from the early days through to now. He's a much more confident and fluid guitar player, and that's nice. I think, as Matt mentioned, there's actually some nice roving bass here from Doug McKinnon, who, after his excellent turn on the Starship, I would have actually liked to have heard a bit more of throughout the album. He tends to be a bit lost in the mix sometimes, but here you can hear him, and that's good. It's a nice closing track. It's not pushing any boundaries, but it's perfectly nice.
And there you have it. Those are the tracks that make up Hawkwind Stories from Time and Space. And very interesting, this reaction pod reminds me of the Somnia reaction pod much more than it does the Future Never Waits reaction pod. So having us 3 discussed kind of all these tracks and the various different ways that we've come to it, which I think is one of my takeouts from it. And I remember the immediacy of The Future Never Waits meant that, as a general rule, we actually had broadly the same opinions on most of the tracks. I might listen back to that episode and go, actually, no, we didn't. But it feels to me that we had a fair consensus most of the way through that album. Whereas this time, each of us have found very different things. Even if we've liked a track, all of us, or not liked a track, all of us, we found very, very different things in it. Joe, what are your feelings toward this as a package now, having gone through these tracks?
It reminds me a lot more of Somnia than The Future Never Waits. The Future Never Waits, I think, as you said, was immediately thinking, wow, this is good. You know, there's some very, very strong material on this. I have to say, hand on heart, I mean, I'll obviously go back and kind of listen to it again, but I don't think this is a stronger album as The Future Never Waits, simply because that has such good material on it. I mean, there's nothing here that's musically as strong as They're So Easily Distracted, which I've come to absolutely love. I think that's an amazing track, one of the best things they've done in absolutely decades, but nothing as conceptually interesting or as funny as the beginning. which I know we keep coming back to, but that really just made me smile so much because it reminded me that Hawkwind, they're not just guys who play music. Hawkwind is a whole mythology, a whole worldview. And it was great to hear that expressed on the beginning. And while there's hints of that in some of those opening early tracks, and as I said, there's a nice callback perhaps to Spirit of the Age in Traveller in Time and Space, it doesn't dig into that as much. But, and I think as you said at the start, you can never expect one Hawkwind album to follow on for another and just be part two. There's always something different. And there's still evidence on this album of, as I said, they're trying to still experiment with their sound and what they can do together. And, there are a few strong tracks on it. But again, comparing it to the last album, the production, which again was very impressive, I thought, on The Future Never Waits for the most part, that was one of the things that really kind of made it stand out. I think here the production has gone back to feeling a bit demo-ish in places. There hasn't perhaps been as much attention paid to some of the arrangements. It's lacking in dynamism. And I think last time I was saying with Tim had come on board that he seemed to have brought a load of kit with him because a lot of the keyboard sounds a lot more analog. There's a real breadth of keyboard sounds. Here, it sounds like he's gone back to a more reduced kit again.
Matt, again, it feels like one where we've all been connecting with this in very different ways.
Yeah, I think on the whole, compared to the strength of the previous album, this has not met the expectations, which I guess I didn't even realize that I had. I am disappointed that it feels a little bit insipid in its construction. I wouldn't mind trying to get hold of the vinyl or something and seeing whether or not there's a mastering which is a bit better than what I've got. It's possible that for whatever reason, the digital version which I grabbed to listen to is not sounding as good as it could. Maybe there's a way of getting it a bit better, a bit more separated, or maybe I can play with my EQs or something. I just didn't have the time, to do that and react to this. So maybe there's a way of making that better. Again, I don't know because I'm still stuck in the past with Hawkwind. I don't know if the fan reaction to things like Incineration and that kind of thing was really popular. The fact that they played it on stage made me feel like they were proud of it. So I guess I was expecting them to try and beat that. And I feel like they've gone in a different direction, which again is very Hawkwind and I'm not surprised about. But I guess I had some hope that maybe that would take them in that direction, which is the direction that I like. Yeah, but there's a couple of tracks in here which I definitely like. I think, Starship I want to listen to again. Stargazers I want to listen to again. Frozen in Time I want to listen to again. Regenerate I want to listen to again. So certainly it's not like as flat as maybe I originally think about it when I make an overall sweeping statement about it. But certainly it doesn't have the instant wow factor as the previous one did.
It's quite a tricky comparison for you specifically, actually, because if you think about two preceding albums, the last one that you heard and the last one they released, that's The Future Never Waits and Electric Teepee, which are both two really, really strong albums. I mean, The Future Never Waits had a real consensus, I think. I didn't read too many negative comments about Future Never Waits. Everybody seemed to be delighted with it. Somnia was one that had its fans and had its detractors. And I feel this one will probably be the same. This, to me, feels like it's a solid Hawkwind album, but it kind of needs to earn its place through repeated listens. And often I get an album and I don't connect immediately with it. And then something in it leaps out. And then because I've got something to hold on to, other things start to come out. And then your kind of attachment to the album develops over time, which will make the deep dive into this album really interesting, as it will with Somnia. That's the interesting thing, that will change over time. There are definitely things for me that do, very different to the ones that you've picked out, partly because I like the track that you absolutely hated, What Do We Do While We're Here, and one or two others. There are definitely things when the vinyl does appear, and I will put it on, I'll let you know what the mix is like. And I'm looking forward to that, because I think there'll be other things that come out of it listening to it in that context. But yeah, a really interesting one. Weirdly, when Hawkwind do something unexpected, if it doesn't connect with me, I still quite like the fact that they've done it, which is a strange thing that I don't think about with many other people. Many other people, I'm just disappointed when I don't connect with it. With Hawkwind, it almost makes me smile that they've done something I didn't see coming. So I'm not disappointed in the album. I think it's solid. I think there's enough on it to kind of grab me. I think the rockers on it are stronger than the rockers on Future Never Waits, funnily enough for me. The rockers on Future Never Waits sat in between these big jazzy instrumental ambient workouts and the beginning and tracks like that. And I wanted those from Future Never Waits. The rockers on here feel stronger to me than the rock tracks on Future Never Waits. So that's an interesting one. So, yeah, this one's going to take a few more listens. It'll get a few more listens from me, particularly when the vinyl turns up. We've all come to it from lots of different directions and found lots of different references and liked and not liked lots of different things. The overall sense of the album, we actually seem to be quite united on. So that's an interesting place to go. There is, of course, another part of this package, which is the cover that we need to take a look at. And again, funnily enough, the position here against, if I look at the last two, I really like the Somnia cover. I pulled it out today and had another look at it. I love the Somnia cover. It's so radically different to any other Hawkwind cover, at least in this century. They really leaned into it, has this real sense of mystery. You don't really know what it is. When you find out what it is, that makes it even more mysterious. And the themes of the album, Sleep and all that, the whole thing really works to package. And then we get The Future Never Waits, which is this absolute banger of an album. And the album didn't have the cover it deserved. And then we get this one. Joe, immediate thoughts when you first saw this cover?
Stories from time and space that could produce all manner of different images. We got a clock, and it's quite a nice clock, and I quite like the color of the sleeve. I think it's a very nice blue, and I quite like that Hawkwind logo, actually, and the lettering they've got there. I don't think Stories from Time and Space, for some reason, works as well, but the actual Hawkwind name works really well in that lettering. But yeah, I just kind of feel that they could have done a lot more. And I know that something that you shared, Andy, there have been some different versions, or certainly different versions of the posters for this, which were a bit more science fiction, a bit more like book covers or magazine covers. And maybe something like that might have worked better. So it's a little underwhelming, if I'm honest.
And Matt, I'm guessing that you're going to feel similarly.
I feel looking at this gives me Orinoco Flow vibes. This feels like a Pure Moods compendium or something rather than a Hawkwind album. Maybe because of the beachiness to it. Because even like the little shells, which are the hand pieces, and even the font and stuff with the blues and stuff, it's very safe. It's very nice. It's not as provocative as a Barney Bubbles thing. Maybe it's not fair to judge this on where they were, because where they are is not there, because we know that they go all over the place. But I think they have been unfortunate with the last couple of album designs. But what did make me smile is that it's got the 10 past 10.
Yeah, I was going to go into that. I mean, you'll remember I did a talk on, I can't remember exactly what it's about, but it included the fact if you go to any watch online store, Swatch, Rolex, everything, the time on every single watch face will be 10 past 10. That is a marketing thing because people respond to that because it's like happy hour. It's a little smile. And clearly, in marketing terms, there's a tiny percentage of people whose inclination to actually make a purchase is enhanced by this. And tiny little percentages of people is worth billions and billions of dollars globally. So this, for untold decades, has been the standard. And that's what you'll see. It also means if you're generating with AI, which this may well have been, then AI generates images based on what it knows, and what it knows is what it's seen online. So if I only showed Matt ever clock faces that said 10 past 10, and then asked Matt to draw a clock face, he's going to draw a clock face that says 10 past 10. And when I look at this cover, like Joe, I like the colors. The colors feel like they connect to the relaxed feel of the album. So it's solid. But to me, it's a missed opportunity. There's another album cover by Rush from their last studio album called Clockwork Angels, which is basically exactly this. It's a clock face with the numbers in the hands that you can see through onto a nicely designed background, which in Rush's case is red. But whoever did that has gone quite deeply into it. So the numbers are replaced by these runic symbols. And they add this air of mystery. They seem to connect with the subject matter in the album. And then the time is 12 minutes past 9, which if you know anything about Rush and you know the 24-hour clock, that's 21:12. So there's an Easter egg for Rush fans. The time means something and there are connections. So the thing works as a package. It's connected to the band and to the music and to the album and to the concept. So I kind of look at this and go, it's fine, but it could have had more to it. It's definitely better than the Future Never Waits album cover, but for me, not as good as the Somnia album cover, which I have a particular fondness for. What I do like is the back cover, as Joe talked about with the artwork for the tour and the title of the album and it having that 1950s science fiction art deco feel to it, which is something that I really like. And the back cover of the album has some of that. And I would have much preferred the back cover. We've said this before with Hawkwind albums, haven't we? I would have preferred the back cover to be the front cover because I just like that style and that illustration. Have you checked out the back cover, Matt?
I didn't know that that was available. Sorry.
No worries. Joe, you've seen it, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. I've got it in front of me and it's in a different kind of color palette entirely. It's all burnished bronzes and soft oranges. As you say, it's very much that kind of Art Deco theme to it. And it's basically, you've got a highway with a slightly retro futuristic cars, one going towards the city, which you can see in the background, and one is coming towards us. And the city, again, looks like a sci-fi Art Deco version of 30s New York. It's got the kind of a version of either the Empire State Building or Chrysler Building. And it's also got the time and space arrows for the highways as well, which is actually quite a nice touch. So, yeah, I would have preferred this on the front as well.
Cool. So a consensus on the covers and probably the overall feel of the album, but different tracks kind of leaping out to each of us. Somnia was about 18 months ago. So we've had Somnia, Future Never Waits, and this. That's 5 slabs of vinyl, given that 2 of those are double in 18 months. They just keep putting new material down, which is something I hope they continue to do. It's quite remarkable, really.
Yeah, what's interesting is in that prog piece, it mentions how they had basically been recording ever since they stopped doing The Future Never Waits, and how they'd actually accumulated a lot of material, and some of which I think Magnus was saying had gone in the bin. And he was saying there's some really good things in the bin. And I'm kind of wondering if they're his songs. In the bin, I don't know. But I mean, he seemed to suggest that there was a lot more material, actually. I don't know, it's a little frustrating because I think there's 3 or 4 things on here which are, as I said, they're kind of B-side tracks. I mean, the album is an hour long, and actually you could have cut this down to a more classic 45 minutes, and I think it probably would have been stronger for it.
So it's one of those classic double albums where there's like 3 sides of material, and it would have been better to have a really strong single album. Yeah, we've talked about that a bit, haven't we, Matt, given Electric Teepee?
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering when I saw that it was pretty much an even hour, isn't it, this thing? I do wonder, in today's day and age, sometimes albums that are this long, that don't instantly grab you or work hard, can run the risk of, oh yeah, I'll get around to that, and then something else happens. And then you don't really give it the chance. So it's potentially a risky move, but I also feel like Hawkwind know who their audience is at this point. And I think the Hawkwind audience are definitely going to give them the benefit of the doubt and are probably going to really enjoy it. So I hope it does well for them. I hope they've got a few more in them. Either that or maybe they've got a really amazing Tales from the Bin that they can make in a few years' time, which would be fun to hear.
I think that's a good summation of the state of affairs with this. Joe, thanks as ever. What's the state of play with The Big Book of Peter Hamill, which is not the title?
It could be, though, except it would probably be The Very Big Book of Peter Hamill.
I was really hoping it was going to be Hamill Time.
Very good.
That was my title idea.
Yeah, so I think it's about 3/4 written. I'm still speaking to people. I had a big interview with David Jackson yesterday, who's the sax player, and that was excellent. We were on the phone for about 3 hours together. And often you have interviews with people and they're a bit like, it's okay, I got a few decent quotes there, but that was a full-on conversation. So anyway, yes, it's all on track. I'm going to be delivering a first draft at the end of June, so I'll certainly have something to deliver by then. But my worry is that it's very long at the moment. It's certainly looking like it's going to be longer than Days of the Underground.
2 volumes?
I think what I might try and do is similar to Days of the Underground. I might do a kind of companion book, which goes with like a special edition, which has some of the stuff that might need to be taken out of the main book in it. But no, I don't think it's part 1 and part 2. I have a vision of kind of what needs to go in the main book.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to that.
Thank you.
If it's anywhere near Days of the Underground, which is a fantastic read. And we hope that there are more release day reaction pods that we can get together for. Joe, you know us, we'll be looking for ways to drag you back into the fold at some future point anyway.
Always have to take part.
Excellent. So Matt is about to go into frantic edit mode, and we will see you next time when we re-emerge, as we have to get back in again listening to It Is the Business of the Future to Be Dangerous. And I've got to say, this has been quite the extreme flip, going from heavy listening of that to a day of heavy listening to this and then back again. There's contrast for you in a nutshell. Until then, stay safe. We'll see you all soon.
technicians of Spaceship Earth, you have been listening to Hawkbinge, the Hawkwind podcast. It was devised and presented by Andy Hood and Matt Longstaff. The soundtrack was produced by Dissonant, so thank you very much for that. To contact the show, drop us a message on Facebook, Instagram, or X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, by searching @Hawkbinge, or send an email to podcast@hawkbinge.space. Hawkbinge is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. To find more great band and music-focused podcasts like this one, head to @DeepDivePodNet on Twitter and dive in. Thank you as always for listening. We'll see you next time.